Welcome back to Ethics. I'm Tom, and today we are beginning to talk about Kant's ethics, Kantian ethics. His view is what's referred to as deontology. He is one deontologist. There are different brands of deontology, but Kant is arguably the most famous. Um, so, Deontology is one of the main three kind of camps of ethics. There is virtue ethics with Aristotle, consequentialism with Mill and Bentham and those kind of guys. And then you have deontology. Now, deontology, the term, it has that ology to it, just like biology or zoology or what have you. So it means the study of, and deon refers to duty or obligation. Okay, so when you're talking about deontologist ethics, you're talking about ethics in terms of the study of our duties or obligations, right? So for a deontologist, that's what ethics really is. It's the study of our sense of obligation and or our obligations that we have and how we fulfill them. So one thing about deontology to kind of get the ball rolling here is if you think about an action and just kind of, you can label three parts of an action, right? You have your intention, desire, whatever prompts that action, right? So let's consider an action, right? Like I answer my phone, right? So I hear the phone, I see who it is, I want to see what they have to say, right? I have this intention to kind of know what's going on. I pick it up, and then once I do that, then there's kind of an effect of that, right? The person on the other end talks, and then something happens, right? There's results of that action. So there's the intention, there's the action itself, and then there's the results of that action. When we were talking about consequentialism, they evaluated whether an action was right or wrong based on the consequences that it produced, the things that followed the action, right? Deontology studies the stuff that comes before the action, right? The intentions, motives, ideals that propel us into action, right? And so it's really, and they're less concerned, not, and in fact, in Kant's case, not concerned at all with the results, right? For Kant, very simply, it's about doing the right thing for the right reasons, and that's it, right? Um, for this video, I'm going to just kind of go over some of the basics in this initial reading. It's a summary from Phronesis about Kantian ethics and go over some of the main ideas here. So Kant's going to be very concerned with what our obligations, our moral obligations are, and he's going to have a way to try to isolate what our genuine moral obligations are. You might have conflicting stories about which principles are genuine moral principles, right? And so the way he's going to isolate what he thinks are genuine moral principles is through his categorical imperative, which we'll talk about more in the next video. Um, and and then also Kant will be concerned with where these principles come from, and then also what it is to really act based on these principles, right? So one distinction at the outset is that Kant will talk a lot about a priori principles, a priori reasoning, a priori ground to our principles. This is it's a Latin term. And it's contrasted with a posteriori. Okay, so the Latin term, so a priori actually just means prior to. That's what it means. And a posteriori means after, basically. So then the question is, well, prior to what, right? These are general kind of like philosophical terms that mean a priori means prior to experience, right? and it means prior to experience in a particular way. A priori principles or a priori knowledge, you can have all kinds of different things that you say are a priori, have to do with things that are not derived from experience. They're actually things that we apply to experience. So mathematics in general is thought to be a priori, right? We apply mathematical principles in the way we view the world, right? Um, and one way to think about this, it has to do with the grounding of those principles, right? So, for example, experience would never disconfirm mathematical truths, right? I mean, geometry is a different thing. So remember that. But and Kant actually has a lot to say about that. But you will never find an object or a set of objects that disconfirms the belief that 2 + 2 = 4, right? Because it's the way we organize those objects, right? And it's grounded on our reasoning, right? How numbers fit together. Um, and same thing with certain like definitions, right? Like you're never going to find someone who's an unmarried or a married bachelor, right? It's just not going to happen. You're not going to find a four-sided triangle out in nature and be like, oh wow, I always thought triangles had 3 sides. That's just not the way it works because they're stipulations, conceptual distinctions that are based in reasoning alone, not out in the world, right? They apply to the world, and we say they match up with the world in a certain way, but they just function differently than facts. So, a posteriori facts would be things like whether or not it's raining right now, right? How do I figure that out? Well, I have to find out from experience. I have to look out the window, right? Or that I don't know, the Broncos are going to win the Super Bowl or something like that. You have to look out. Those are confirmed by facts, right? And that's how you come to know those things, by observing. Um, so for Kant, the reason why he makes this distinction is he's gonna argue that actually moral principles are a priori. That moral principles are things that we apply to our experience, right? We apply it to our own actions and self-evaluation and the way in which our reason factors into motivating our actions. And we also apply it to the actions of others and to all kinds of other things when we're evaluating them ethically, right? And so he thinks that we actually don't derive what is right or wrong from the way the world is. Instead, it's something that we apply based on rationality, right? And how that works exactly will be we'll talk about in the next video with the categorical imperative. But the first concept here has to do with that they mention in the reading is the concept of duty or obligation, right? And so I mean, this is a pretty intuitive notion to think about morality in terms of obligations. And we do this all the time, right? You have obligations to your friends, you have obligations to your family, right? We have a sense of what it is to be a good son or daughter or to be a good parent, right? If you have kids, you have a certain sense of obligation to take care of them and intervene in certain places. We also think about military service as fulfilling your obligation to your country and these kinds of things. Um, and those moral sensibilities can run against what more cynical views of like human nature, right? So if someone says you really shouldn't join the military, you should really just get a good job and do something for yourself, and don't sacrifice your well-being or yourself, or put yourself in jeopardy for that. And someone can respond that that's not the right thing to do, right? That the right thing to do is to fulfill your obligation to your country, or do have this act out of this sense of duty. And so this is part of why Kant thinks about morality as not derived from experience but always applied to experience, right? That our sense of um, morality and the kind of ethical ideals we have um, uh, always kind of precede our actions, right? And there's a sense in which lots of facts about the world don't deter our moral sensibilities oftentimes, right? Uh, uh, we run counter to our nature in all kinds of ways, right? Even if you think in basic terms like fasting, right? We have a natural impulse to eat, um, but we, some of us, for religious reasons or health reasons or whatever, we stop ourselves from eating, right? We can resist those instincts. That's something that's a lot of people would argue is distinctively human, right? Um, Now, another concept here that he talks about and leans on quite a bit is this idea of goodwill. Um, a goodwill is important for Kant, and we'll talk more in detail about this. But if you're talking about, being a moral or doing the right thing is acting out of moral obligation, right? Doing the right thing for the right reasons, then having a goodwill is going to be, kind of the central idea there, right? Someone who has a goodwill acts for the right reasons, right? They don't have malicious intent. They have only the intention to do something good, help people do whatever is right. And so, this idea of a goodwill, he thinks, is really paramount to understanding what it is to be ethical, right? And this is part of where you see Kant run up against um, Mill, right? So for Mill and consequentialists, as long as the results are good, that's fine. It doesn't matter what your intention was. But for Kant, he thinks if you do something that benefits a lot of people, but you have a really bad will, so like you're doing it for instrumental reasons, you're trying to manipulate people or something like this, then he thinks then that just basically negates the moral worth of your action, right? So, and that's a pretty intuitive view, right? If you are doing something that benefits a lot of people, but you have bad intentions, then we tend to think you're not a very good person, right? You're not doing the right thing. The last distinction that I just kind of want to hash out here is this distinction between acting in accordance with duty versus acting for the sake of duty, right? So basically, acting for the sake of duty is doing the right thing for the right reasons, and acting in accordance with duty is doing the right thing, but not necessarily for the right reasons, right? So here, for Kant, only acting for the sake of duty has genuine moral worth. So, if you are, he gives this example in the reading that we'll go over where he has a shopkeeper and the shopkeeper gives everyone a fair price in his shop. So he doesn't upcharge anyone, right? And he doesn't give anyone undue discounts or whatever, right? And it looks like he's acting very fairly. But really, the motivation for the shopkeeper is to have a reputable business, right? He wants to look good to other people. He wants to keep customers coming in. And so, although he's acting in accordance with duty, he's doing the right thing, he's doing the fair thing. He's not really doing it simply because it is the fair thing to do. He's doing it for instrumental reasons, for the benefits that he will get from that, right? And so Kant thinks if you have kind of a hidden sense of self-interest in what you're doing, then you're really just acting selfishly and not acting morally. You're not acting based on your sense of obligation or your kind of what the way he would put it is out of your respect for the moral law. You're acting basically out of self-interest, and it just happens to coincide with what the right thing to do is, right? And that'll be really instrumental for Kant because he's going to really think he's going to evaluate or think that a moral action is one in which one acts based on your sense of obligation, and really only on your sense of obligation. So that's just kind of a preface to Kant's ethics. right? This is kind of like the framework. This is the approach that he's taking. Kant is a very deep thinker. He's very difficult to read, but it made a huge contribution to philosophy. And so I like to break this down into two modules. So the next video, we'll go through some of the details of the actual primary text. And but that's it for now. Okay, thanks.